While everyone was laughing, my husband leaned in and whispered, "Did you see what's behind the curtain? Some secrets are meant to stay hidden, but when your husband whispers those 6 words at your daughter's wedding reception, everything you thought you knew about your life crumbles in an instant." I should have noticed it earlier, the way Marcus kept glancing toward the back corner of the ballroom, his jaw tightening every time someone walked past the burgundy velvet curtains that separated the main reception area from the service corridor. But I was too caught up in the magic of watching our 24-year-old daughter Emma dance with her new husband, too busy soaking in the pride that comes with pulling off the perfect wedding. The Riverside Country Club in Greenwich, Connecticut, had been my dream venue since Emma was 12. Its colonial architecture and manicured gardens overlooking Long Island Sound provided the exact backdrop I had envisioned for this day. The October air carried just enough crispness to make the outdoor ceremony comfortable, and the golden hour light streaming through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows made everything look like a scene from a movie. I was 42, and after 20 years of marriage to Marcus, I thought I knew every expression that crossed his face. But tonight, something was different. Something was wrong. The band struck up another jazz standard, and couples began filling the dance floor. Emma's wedding dress, a vintage-inspired creation with delicate beadwork that had taken 6 months to alter, caught the light beautifully as she swayed with David. My heart swelled watching them together. They had met during their residency at Mount Sinai Hospital, both pursuing careers in emergency medicine, and their love story had unfolded with the kind of steady certainty that made me believe in happily ever after all over again. Marcus leaned back in his chair beside me at the head table, his tuxedo impeccable as always, but his usual confidence seemed strained. He had been checking his phone more frequently throughout the evening, something he rarely did during family events. As the managing partner at Hartwell & Associates, one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms, he was meticulous about boundaries between work and personal time. The reception was flawless. The caterers from Coastal Cuisine had outdone themselves with the lobster bisque and filet mignon. The floral arrangements of white roses and eucalyptus created the exact romantic atmosphere I had hoped for, and even the weather had cooperated perfectly. Our guests, a mix of Marcus's colleagues, my book club friends, Emma's medical school classmates, and family members who had traveled from as far as California, were clearly enjoying themselves. My sister Rachel approached our table, her emerald green dress complementing her auburn hair, which she had styled in an elegant updo for the occasion. She had flown in from Seattle with her husband Tom, and seeing her here meant everything to me. We had grown closer over the years, especially after our mother passed 5 years ago, and she had been instrumental in helping me plan the wedding details from across the country. Rachel smiled warmly, gesturing toward the dance floor where Emma and David were now surrounded by other couples. The sight filled me with such joy that for a moment, I forgot about Marcus's strange behavior entirely. My best friend Jennifer walked over from the bar, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. She had been my maid of honor 20 years ago, and watching her son grow up alongside Emma had created a bond between our families that felt more like sisterhood than friendship. Jennifer's husband Paul worked in finance, and they lived just 20 minutes away in Stamford, making regular dinner parties and weekend gatherings a natural part of our social routine. The evening progressed with all the traditional wedding moments. The father-daughter dance brought tears to my eyes as Marcus walked Emma across the floor to Frank Sinatra's version of "The Way You Look Tonight." His voice caught slightly when he whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, and I felt grateful for the man who had raised our daughter with such devotion. But then came the moment that would change everything. The band had just finished playing "Isn't She Lovely" by Stevie Wonder, and our table was erupting in laughter over Tom's story about his disastrous attempt to catch the bouquet at his nephew's wedding last month. Even the normally reserved David's parents were chuckling, their initial stiffness from earlier in the evening having melted away after a few glasses of wine. That's when Marcus leaned toward me, his breath warm against my ear, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of 200 guests enjoying themselves. "Did you see what's behind the curtain?" The words sent an immediate chill down my spine, though I couldn't explain why. My head turned instinctively toward the burgundy curtains he had been watching all evening. They hung motionless, separating us from whatever lay beyond in the service area, where the catering staff moved efficiently between the kitchen and the main reception space. I looked back at Marcus, searching his face for some explanation, but his expression had become unreadable. The man who had shared my bed for 2 decades, who knew exactly how I liked my coffee in the morning and could predict my reaction to any situation, had become a stranger in that instant. Around us, the conversation continued. Rachel was now telling everyone about the time Emma, at age 7, had insisted on wearing her Halloween costume to a fancy restaurant because she believed the unicorn outfit made her invisible. The memory should have made me smile, but Marcus's words kept echoing in my mind. I tried to focus on the celebration. The cake cutting was scheduled for 9:30, followed by more dancing and the traditional last dance at 11. Emma had specifically requested that the reception not run too late, because several of her medical school friends had early morning shifts at the hospital. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan, but my eyes kept drifting back to those curtains. The fabric was heavy and expensive, chosen by the country club's decorator to maintain the elegant atmosphere while concealing the necessary but less glamorous aspects of event service. I had barely noticed them during our venue walkthrough 6 months ago, too focused on the main ballroom's stunning chandelier and the way the space opened onto the terrace overlooking the water. Marcus excused himself to use the restroom, but instead of heading toward the facilities near the main entrance, he walked in the direction of the curtains. My stomach twisted as I watched him disappear from view, leaving me alone with questions I didn't know how to ask. Jennifer noticed my distraction and leaned closer, her voice filled with concern. She had known me long enough to recognize when something was bothering me, and despite my attempts to maintain a cheerful facade, my anxiety was apparently showing. "Everything okay, Sarah? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile and assured her that I was just overwhelmed by the emotion of the day. It wasn't entirely a lie. Watching your only child get married is an experience that brings up every feeling imaginable, from pride and joy to the bittersweet recognition that a chapter of your life is closing forever. But there was something else gnawing at me now, something that had nothing to do with typical wedding day emotions. The band announced that they would be taking a short break, and the dance floor began to clear as guests returned to their tables or headed to the bar for fresh drinks. Emma and David made their way over to us, both glowing with happiness and slightly out of breath from dancing. Emma hugged me tightly, and I inhaled the familiar scent of her perfume, mixed with the faint smell of wedding flowers from her bouquet. She had chosen the same fragrance she had worn since high school, a light floral scent that always reminded me of spring mornings and the sound of her laughter echoing through our house in Westport. "Mom, this is absolutely perfect," she said, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Thank you for making this day so beautiful." David nodded in agreement, his arm wrapped around Emma's waist. They made such a striking couple, both tall and athletic, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you want from life. Their shared passion for medicine had given them a foundation that I envied, remembering how Marcus and I had struggled to find common ground during the early years of our marriage. I wanted to bask in their happiness, to let their joy wash over me, and push away the growing unease that Marcus's words had triggered. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, a culmination of months of planning and years of dreams about what Emma's wedding would be like. But Marcus still hadn't returned, and my eyes kept searching the crowd for any sign of him. The catering staff continued their efficient work, clearing empty plates and refilling champagne glasses with the kind of professional invisibility that marked a well-trained team. I had specifically chosen Coastal Cuisine because of their reputation for seamless service, and they were living up to every expectation. Rachel rejoined our conversation, having just returned from the ladies' room where she had helped a slightly tipsy bridesmaid repair her lipstick. She was in full celebration mode, her natural warmth and humor helping to maintain the festive atmosphere at our table. "Where did Marcus disappear to?" she asked, glancing around the ballroom. He missed Paul's impression of Dad trying to figure out how to use the new coffee machine. I made some excuse about him taking a phone call, though I had no idea if that was true. The lie came easily, a reflex born from 20 years of smoothing over Marcus's occasional absences and unexplained mood changes. He was a complicated man, driven and successful, but sometimes distant in ways that I had learned not to question too deeply. The band resumed playing, and Emma and David returned to the dance floor for what would become one of my favorite memories of the entire evening. They moved together with such natural grace, lost in their own world while surrounded by family and friends who loved them. The sight should have filled me with pure happiness. Instead, I found myself scanning the room for Marcus, my anxiety growing with each passing minute. That's when I noticed the curtain move. It was subtle, just a slight shift in the fabric that could have been caused by air circulation from the building's heating system, or the movement of staff members behind it. But something about the way it moved seemed deliberate, as if someone had brushed against it while trying to remain hidden. My heart began to race, though I couldn't articulate why. There was nothing inherently threatening about a curtain moving at a wedding reception. The rational part of my mind knew that the catering staff had every reason to move freely through the service areas, and that Marcus could have simply gotten caught up in a conversation with another guest. But the irrational part of my mind, the part that had been married to Marcus long enough to recognize when he was keeping secrets, knew that something was very wrong. I excused myself from the table, telling Jennifer that I needed some fresh air. The October evening was crisp but not cold, and several other guests had stepped onto the terrace to enjoy the view of Long Island Sound under the moonlight. The water stretched out endlessly, its surface reflecting the lights from boats anchored in the distance. From the terrace, I had a different angle on the ballroom, and I could see through the floor-to-ceiling windows to where the reception continued inside. The scene looked perfect from this perspective, like something from a wedding magazine, but I felt disconnected from it all now, as if I were watching someone else's celebration through glass. I walked along the terrace, trying to calm my racing thoughts and find a rational explanation for Marcus's behavior. Maybe he had received an urgent call from the office about a case that needed immediate attention. Maybe he was dealing with a family emergency that he didn't want to spoil Emma's wedding by sharing. Maybe I was overreacting to an innocent comment that had nothing to do with anything important. But as I rounded the corner of the building, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a service entrance near the back of the building, barely visible from the main reception area, but clearly accessible from the parking lot. A car was parked there, its engine running, and I could see two figures standing beside it in what appeared to be an intense conversation. One of them was Marcus. The other was a woman I had never seen before. She was younger than me, probably in her early 30s, with long dark hair and an elegant black dress that was entirely inappropriate for someone who should have been working at a wedding reception. She wasn't part of the catering staff or the country club's employees. She was someone else entirely. Someone who had been waiting behind those curtains while my daughter celebrated the happiest day of her life. Marcus was standing close to her, closer than he should have been to any woman who wasn't his wife. And even from a distance, I could see the tension in his posture. He was gesturing with his hands in the way he did when he was trying to convince someone of something important, and she was shaking her head repeatedly, as if refusing whatever he was asking of her. I pressed myself against the building's stone facade, hidden in the shadows but close enough to observe their interaction. My heart was pounding so hard that I was certain they would hear it, but they were too absorbed in their conversation to notice anything else. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out what looked like a manila envelope. She held it toward Marcus, but he stepped back, his hands raised as if he didn't want to touch whatever she was offering him. Their conversation became more animated, and I could see the frustration on both their faces even though I couldn't hear their words. Then Marcus looked directly toward the building, as if he sensed he was being watched. I flattened myself against the stone wall, hoping the shadows would conceal me, and held my breath until I heard the sound of a car door slamming. When I peered around the corner again, the woman was gone, and Marcus was walking back toward the main entrance of the country club. He paused at the door, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized as his way of composing himself before facing a difficult situation. I waited until he was inside, before making my way back to the terrace, my mind racing with questions I didn't know how to ask, and implications I didn't want to consider. The reception was still in full swing, the band playing another romantic ballad while couples swayed on the dance floor, but everything felt different now. Marcus was back at our table when I returned, chatting casually with Tom about a recent court case as if nothing had happened. His tuxedo was perfectly arranged. His smile was genuine as he watched Emma and David dance, and there was no visible sign of the intense conversation I had just witnessed. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew that my marriage, my life, and everything I thought I understood about the man I had loved for 20 years was about to change forever. The cake cutting proceeded as scheduled, with Emma and David feeding each other small bites while everyone laughed and took pictures. The photographer captured every moment, creating memories that would last a lifetime, but I felt like I was watching it all from underwater, disconnected from the joy surrounding me. Marcus put his arm around my waist during the traditional toasts, and I had to fight the urge to pull away from his touch. His skin felt foreign against mine now, as if the man I had shared a bed with for 2 decades had become a stranger in the space of a single evening. The band announced the last dance, and couples began to gather on the floor for the final song of the evening. Emma and David were in the center, surrounded by family and friends who had come together to celebrate their love, and I tried to focus on their happiness, instead of the growing dread that was consuming me. But as the music played and the evening drew to a close, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the black dress, the envelope she had tried to give Marcus, and the secret that had been hidden behind the curtain while everyone else was laughing and celebrating the beginning of a new chapter in our family's story. Something was happening to me that I couldn't control. My hands were trembling as I held my champagne flute, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the ballroom. 20 years of marriage had taught me to read Marcus like a book, but tonight he was a complete mystery, and that terrified me more than I cared to admit. The reception was winding down now, with many of the older guests beginning to say their goodbyes to Emma and David. My Aunt Margaret, who had traveled from Boston with her husband Frank, approached our table to thank us for such a beautiful celebration. She had been like a second mother to me after my own mother passed, and her presence at the wedding meant more than she could know. "Sarah, darling, this has been absolutely magical," she said, her voice warm with genuine emotion. Emma looked radiant, and you should be so proud of the woman she's become. I managed to smile and accept her compliments, going through the motions of a gracious hostess while my mind remained fixed on the image of Marcus standing too close to that mysterious woman. Margaret continued talking about how the venue reminded her of her own wedding 45 years ago, but her words seemed to be coming from very far away. Marcus stood up to shake hands with Frank, and I watched him carefully, looking for any sign of the tension I had witnessed outside. But he was playing his part perfectly, the successful attorney and devoted father who had just given his daughter the wedding of her dreams. His smile was genuine, his conversation was engaging, and there was nothing in his demeanor to suggest that anything was amiss. Yet I knew something fundamental had shifted between us, something that couldn't be undone by pretending it hadn't happened. The band was packing up their equipment, and the catering staff had begun the efficient process of clearing the reception space. Emma and David were making their rounds, thanking guests and accepting final congratulations before they would leave for their honeymoon in Tuscany the following morning. They would spend 2 weeks exploring Italian vineyards and medieval villages, a trip they had planned for over a year. Jennifer approached me again, this time with Paul beside her. They were preparing to leave, and Jennifer's expression showed that she was still concerned about my earlier distraction. "Are you sure you're okay, Sarah? You've seemed a little off tonight, and I know how overwhelming wedding days can be." Paul nodded in agreement, his kind eyes reflecting the same worry I saw in Jennifer's face. They had been part of our lives for so long that they could read my moods almost as well as Marcus could, and I realized that my attempts to hide my anxiety hadn't been as successful as I had hoped. I assured them once again that I was fine, just tired from all the planning and preparation that had gone into making the day perfect. It was a reasonable explanation, and they seemed to accept it, though Jennifer gave me an extra long hug before they left, whispering that I should call her if I needed to talk about anything. After they were gone, I found myself alone at the head table with Marcus, watching the last few guests make their way toward the exit. The country club staff was working quietly around us, transforming the magical wedding venue back into an ordinary function room with practiced efficiency. Emma and David came over for one final goodbye before heading to their hotel room. They would be leaving early in the morning for their flight to Rome, and this might be the last time I saw them for 2 weeks. Emma hugged me tightly, and I tried to memorize the feeling of holding my daughter in my arms, the scent of her perfume, the sound of her laughter. "Thank you for everything, Mom," she whispered against my ear. This was the most perfect day I could have imagined. David shook Marcus's hand and then surprised me with a warm hug. He had always been respectful and kind, but tonight there was something extra in his embrace, as if he understood that he was now officially part of our family, in a way that carried both privilege and responsibility. "We love you both so much," he said simply, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. After they left, the ballroom felt enormous and empty, even though there were still several dozen people finishing their conversations and gathering their belongings. The silence between Marcus and me stretched uncomfortably, filled with all the questions I wanted to ask, but didn't know how to voice. Finally, Marcus stood up and extended his hand to me. "Ready to go home?" His voice was gentle, the same tone he had used for 20 years when asking if I was ready to leave social events. But tonight, The familiar words felt loaded with meaning I couldn't decipher. Was he asking if I was ready to go home and pretend that nothing had happened? Was he preparing to tell me something that would change everything I thought I knew about our life together? I took his hand because I didn't know what else to do, and we walked together through the country club's elegant foyer toward the parking lot. The October night air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant salt smell of Long Island Sound. Under different circumstances, it would have been the perfect end to a perfect day. But as we approached our car, a black BMW sedan that Marcus had purchased just 6 months earlier, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking toward the end of something much more significant than just a wedding reception. Marcus held the passenger door open for me, another gesture that had become routine over the years, but tonight felt strangely formal. As he walked around to the driver's side, I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the car's window, and for just a moment, his composed expression slipped, revealing something that looked like fear. The drive home to Westport would take about 20 minutes. 20 minutes during which I would have to decide whether to confront him about what I had seen or continue pretending that everything was normal. Our house, a colonial-style home we had purchased 15 years ago when Marcus made partner at his firm, suddenly seemed very far away. Marcus started the engine and pulled out of the country club's circular driveway, the headlights illuminating the perfectly manicured landscape that had provided such a beautiful backdrop for Emma's wedding photos earlier in the day. The reception had exceeded every expectation I had held for this night, except for the growing certainty that my marriage was hiding secrets I had never suspected. We drove in silence for the first few minutes, the radio playing softly in the background while I stared out the window at the familiar Connecticut scenery passing by in the darkness. These were roads we had traveled countless times over the years, taking Emma to soccer practice and piano lessons, driving to dinner parties with friends, commuting to our respective jobs in Manhattan when traffic or train schedules demanded it. But tonight, even the familiar felt foreign, as if I were seeing our life together through new eyes that revealed details I had somehow missed before. When we stopped at a red light near the Westport town center, Marcus finally broke the silence. "The wedding was beautiful, Sarah. You did an incredible job with all the planning." His words were kind and genuine, but they felt like small talk between strangers rather than intimate conversation between husband and wife. I thanked him quietly, not trusting myself to say more without revealing the turmoil that was consuming me. The light turned green, and we continued toward home, but the brief exchange had only emphasized the distance that seemed to be growing between us with each passing mile. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I had made my decision. I was going to ask him about the woman behind the curtain, and whatever his answer revealed about our marriage, I was prepared to face it. But as we walked up the front steps of our house, Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. He glanced at it quickly, and I saw his face change, the carefully maintained composure finally cracking to reveal something that looked unmistakably like panic. "I need to make a quick call," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Work emergency." He disappeared into his home office before I could respond, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that somehow sounded as final as a gunshot. Standing alone in our foyer, surrounded by the comfortable familiarity of the home we had shared for 15 years, I realized that the woman behind the curtain was just the beginning, and that the secrets Marcus was keeping were bigger and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. I stood in our foyer for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to the muffled sound of Marcus's voice coming from behind his office door. The tone was urgent, almost desperate, completely different from his usual confident attorney persona. I had heard him handle crisis calls before, seen him navigate complex legal emergencies with calm precision, but this was something else entirely. Our house suddenly felt like a stranger's home. The family photos lining the hallway walls, the wedding gifts we still hadn't properly displayed, even the familiar scent of the vanilla candles I always kept lit in the living room. Everything seemed different now, as if I were seeing it all through a lens that revealed hidden meanings I had never noticed before. I walked quietly toward the kitchen, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floors we had refinished just 2 years ago. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the silence, and I found myself moving more carefully, as if I were an intruder in my own home. The kitchen was exactly as we had left it that morning, with Emma's coffee cup still sitting in the sink, and the newspaper folded open to the wedding announcement section, where our daughter's engagement photo smiled back at me. That morning felt like a lifetime ago, back when my biggest concern was whether the weather would cooperate for the outdoor ceremony. Marcus's voice grew louder from the office, though I still couldn't make out individual words. The conversation seemed to be getting more heated, and I heard him say something that sounded like, "Absolutely not," followed by a long pause. Then his voice dropped to an almost whisper, and I had to strain to hear anything at all. I found myself moving closer to the office door, my heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and fear. 20 years of marriage had taught me to respect Marcus's privacy, especially when it came to his legal work. But tonight felt different. Tonight I felt entitled to know what was happening behind that door. The conversation ended abruptly, and I heard the sound of his desk chair rolling back. I quickly retreated to the kitchen, grabbing a glass from the cabinet and filling it with water I didn't want, trying to look casual when he emerged from the office. When Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face was pale and his usually perfect hair was disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. The confident attorney who had charmed wedding guests just hours earlier had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and conversational. He nodded quickly, too quickly, and began loosening his tie with hands that were visibly shaking. "Just a client situation that needed immediate attention. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was, because in 20 years of marriage, I had never seen Marcus look like this after a work call. Even during his most challenging cases, even when he was working 18-hour days and surviving on coffee and determination, he maintained a level of professional composure that was part of his identity. I set down my water glass and turned to face him fully, studying his expression in the soft kitchen lighting. The man standing across from me was keeping secrets, dangerous secrets, and I was tired of pretending I didn't know it. "Marcus, who was the woman behind the curtain tonight?" The question came out more directly than I had intended, but there was no taking it back now. His face went completely white, and for a moment, I thought he might actually faint. He gripped the edge of the kitchen counter as if he needed it to stay upright. "What woman?" "Sarah, I don't know what you're talking about," but his voice betrayed him. The smooth, persuasive tone that had made him one of Manhattan's most successful attorneys was gone, replaced by something weak and unconvincing. He was lying to me, and we both knew it. "I saw you, Marcus. I saw you talking to her by the service entrance. I saw the envelope she tried to give you." He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them again, something fundamental had changed. The pretense was gone, and I could see that he was calculating his next move, trying to decide how much truth he could afford to reveal. "It's complicated, Sarah. It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is. Tell me who she was and why you've been acting strange all evening. Tell me why you looked terrified when you got that text message just now." Marcus walked to the kitchen table and sat down heavily in one of the chairs we had purchased together when we first moved to this house. He looked older somehow, as if the weight of whatever he was carrying had finally become too much to bear standing up. "Her name is Diana Martinez. She's a private investigator." The words hit me like a physical blow. A private investigator. At our daughter's wedding. The implications were staggering, and my mind immediately began racing through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. Why was a private investigator at Emma's wedding, Marcus? He was quiet for so long that I began to wonder if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, because someone hired her to follow me, to document my activities, to gather evidence. Evidence of what? Another long silence. I could hear the grandfather clock in the living room ticking, marking time that felt both endless and insufficient for the magnitude of what was happening between us. Evidence of an affair. The kitchen seemed to tilt around me, and I had to sit down in the chair across from him to keep from falling. An affair. 20 years of marriage. 20 years of shared dreams and challenges, and the daily intimacy of building a life together. And he had been having an affair. "How long?" I managed to ask. "It's over, Sarah. It ended months ago. I swear to you it's completely over." "How long, Marcus?" He looked directly at me for the first time since we had started this conversation, and I saw tears forming in his eyes. 2 years. 2 years. While I had been planning Emma's wedding, worrying about her medical school stress, dealing with my mother's death and the complicated grief that followed, Marcus had been living a double life. 2 years of lies, 2 years of betrayal, 2 years of looking me in the eye every morning and pretending to be faithful. Who is she? It doesn't matter now. She's not part of my life anymore. It matters to me. Who is she? Marcus took a shuddering breath before answering. Her name is Carolyn Walsh. She's a paralegal at the firm. was a paralegal. She took a job in Chicago 3 months ago. The details were coming faster now, as if he had been holding them back for so long that they were finally breaking free like water through a dam. A paralegal at his firm. Someone he saw every day. Someone who was part of his professional world that I rarely entered. The betrayal felt even more complete knowing that she had been woven into the fabric of his daily life. And the private investigator? Who hired her? Marcus's expression grew even more pained, and I realized that we hadn't reached the worst part yet. Carolyn's husband. He suspected something, and hired Diana to follow us, to document the affair. He's planning to use the evidence in their divorce proceedings. And he wanted her to get photos at our daughter's wedding. No, Sarah, that's not what happened. Diana wasn't working for him anymore. She was there tonight to warn me. I felt like I was trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit together, and every new piece of information only made the picture more confusing and frightening. Warn you about what? Marcus stood up abruptly and began pacing around the kitchen, his agitation growing with each step. Carolyn's husband isn't just looking for a divorce settlement. He's a prosecutor with the district attorney's office, and he's threatening to use his position to destroy me. He's been investigating some of my clients, looking for any connection he can make to questionable activities. He's trying to build a case that could get me disbarred, maybe even criminally charged. The room was spinning now, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was about our entire life being dismantled by someone who wanted revenge against my husband for destroying his marriage. Are his threats legitimate? Could he actually do that? Marcus stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, something that looked like genuine terror. Some of my clients operate in gray areas, Sarah. That's the nature of high-stakes corporate law. I've always been careful to stay within legal boundaries, but Walsh is creative, and he's motivated. He could probably find ways to make things look worse than they are. Could he destroy your practice? He could destroy everything. My reputation, my career, our financial security, everything we've built together. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what Marcus was telling me. Our comfortable life in Westport, Emma's medical school tuition that we were still paying, the retirement plans we had made, all of it was potentially at risk because my husband had decided to have an affair with a coworker. What did the private investigator want tonight? What was in the envelope? Photos. Documentation of meetings I had with clients that Walsh is trying to paint as suspicious. Diana said that Walsh is planning to turn everything over to the State Bar Association next week, and possibly to federal prosecutors as well. Why would she warn you? Why would she risk her own career to help you? Marcus sat back down and looked directly at me, and I saw something in his expression that I recognized, but hadn't seen in years. It was the same look he had given me when we were dating, and he was trying to decide whether to trust me with something important about his past. Because she doesn't believe I've done anything actually wrong, because she thinks Walsh is abusing his position to pursue a personal vendetta, and because... He trailed off. But I knew there was more. Because what, Marcus? Because she made a mistake during her investigation. She discovered some information about Walsh's own activities that could be problematic for him if it became public. She feels responsible for the situation getting out of hand. I stood up from the table, needing to move, needing to do something other than sit still while my world collapsed around me. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at our backyard, where Emma had played as a child, and where we had hosted countless barbecues and birthday parties over the years. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. What happens now? I don't know. Diana thinks I should hire a criminal defense attorney immediately. She thinks Walsh is going to move fast, try to build momentum before I can mount an effective defense. And what do you think? Marcus was quiet for a long moment before answering. I think I've destroyed everything that matters to me. I think I've put our family at risk because I was selfish and stupid. And I think there's a good chance that by this time next month, we'll have lost everything we've worked for. I turned back to face him, and I saw that he was crying now, tears running down his face unchecked. The successful attorney, the confident father who had walked Emma down the aisle just hours earlier, had been replaced by someone broken and frightened and completely lost. But I felt strangely calm, as if the worst had finally happened, and there was nothing left to fear. We need to call Emma and David. We need to tell them what's happening before they hear it from someone else. Sarah, they're leaving for their honeymoon tomorrow morning. Can't this wait until they get back? No, Marcus. It can't wait. If this is going to become public, if there's going to be media attention or legal proceedings, they need to know. They're adults, and they're married now, and they deserve to be prepared. He nodded slowly, accepting the logic of what I was saying, even though I could see that the thought of telling Emma about his affair and its consequences was almost more than he could bear. What about us, Sarah? What happens to our marriage? It was the question I had been dreading, but also the one I knew I had to answer honestly. I don't know, Marcus. I need time to process all of this. I need to understand how you could keep something this big from me for so long, and I need to figure out whether we can rebuild trust after this level of betrayal. I love you, Sarah. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I love you more than anything, and the affair meant nothing. It was a mistake that I regretted from the beginning. If it meant nothing, why did it continue for 2 years? He didn't have an answer for that, and we both knew that the question revealed the depth of the problem we were facing. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, marking the official end of Emma's wedding day and the beginning of whatever came next for our family. I looked at Marcus, this man I had loved and trusted for 20 years, and realized that I was looking at a stranger. But he was a stranger I was still married to, a stranger whose choices had put our entire future at risk, and I had to decide whether our relationship was worth fighting for, or whether some betrayals were simply too big to overcome. The phone rang, startling both of us. Marcus looked at me questioningly, and I nodded for him to answer it. It was nearly 12:30 in the morning, and calls at that hour were never good news. He picked up the phone, and I watched his face change as he listened to whoever was calling. "When?" he asked, his voice tight with tension. "How bad is it?" The conversation was brief, but by the time he hung up, I could see that our situation had just gotten significantly worse. That was Diana. Walsh just called her. He's moving faster than she expected. He's filing complaints with the State Bar Association and the U.S. Attorney's Office first thing Monday morning. And he's planning to hold a press conference. A press conference? He's going to make this public, Sarah. He's going to destroy my reputation before I have a chance to defend myself. I sat back down at the kitchen table, feeling the full weight of what Marcus was telling me. In less than 72 hours, our private crisis would become a public scandal. Emma and David would return from their honeymoon to find their family name in the newspapers. Our friends and neighbors would know about Marcus's affair and the legal troubles that followed. Everything we had built together, everything we had worked to create and protect, was about to be exposed and potentially destroyed by the consequences of choices Marcus had made without considering how they would affect the people who loved him. But as I looked at my husband, crying and frightened and completely broken by the weight of his own mistakes, I realized that I still loved him, despite everything. I was furious with him, disappointed and hurt in ways I didn't think I could ever fully forgive, but I still loved him, and that meant I had a choice to make. I could walk away from 20 years of marriage and let him face the consequences alone, or I could stand by him and help him fight for whatever remained of the life we had built together. The decision would define not just our future, but who I was as a person, and what I believed about love, forgiveness, and the commitments we make to each other. As the clock continued ticking toward dawn, I knew that the real test of our marriage wasn't whether we could survive Marcus's affair, but whether we could survive the aftermath together. And sitting in our kitchen at 1 o'clock in the morning, with our daughter's wedding flowers still fresh in the living room and our entire world about to change forever, I still didn't know what my answer would be. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of decisions that would reshape everything we had built together. I found myself thinking about Emma as a little girl, how she used to climb into our bed on Sunday mornings and insist that we tell her stories about how Mommy and Daddy met. She loved hearing about our first date, how Marcus had been so nervous that he spilled coffee on his shirt, how I had thought it was endearing rather than embarrassing. Those stories felt like they belonged to different people now, a younger couple who believed that love was enough to overcome any obstacle, who couldn't imagine that the challenges they would face would come from within their own choices rather than from external circumstances. Sarah, I need you to know that ending it with Carolyn was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the easiest. I looked up at him, confused by the contradiction in his statement. What do you mean? It was hard because I had gotten comfortable with the excitement, with feeling desired in a way that was different from what we had. But it was easy because every moment with her made me realize how much I loved what we had built together, how much I was risking for something that could never compare to 20 years of real partnership. Then why didn't you end it sooner? Why did it take 2 years? Marcus sat back down across from me, and I could see him struggling to find words that would make sense of something that probably didn't make sense even to him, Because I was scared. Scared that if I ended it, I'd have to face what I had done to us. Scared that you'd find out anyway, and I'd lose everything without even having the affair to show for it. Scared that I was too much of a coward to live with the guilt. And what changed? What finally made you end it? Emma's engagement party. Remember how happy she looked that night? How she kept talking about wanting a marriage like ours? How she hoped she and David would still be holding hands after 20 years like we were? I remembered that night clearly. It had been at our house, a small gathering of close family and friends to celebrate Emma and David's engagement. Emma had given a speech thanking us for showing her what real love looked like, and I had felt so proud of the example we had set for her. Now I realized that even as she was praising our marriage, Marcus was living a lie that could have destroyed everything she admired about us. That night, I realized that I wasn't just betraying you. I was betraying the idea of marriage itself, the institution that our daughter was about to enter with such hope and trust. I couldn't be the father who walked her down the aisle while maintaining a relationship that made a mockery of everything marriage is supposed to represent. So you ended it then. I tried to. But Carolyn didn't want it to end. She had developed feelings that went beyond what either of us had intended, and she threatened to tell you everything if I cut off contact completely. She was blackmailing you? Not for money, but for emotional access. She wanted me to leave you, Sarah. She thought that if you knew about the affair, you'd divorce me, and I'd be free to be with her openly. The revelation hit me like another physical blow. It wasn't just that Marcus had been unfaithful. There had been another woman actively working to destroy our marriage. Someone who had been planning to take my place in his life. What did you tell her? I told her that would never happen, that you were the love of my life, and that the affair had been the biggest mistake I'd ever made. I told her that I would rather face the consequences of telling you myself than let her use my guilt to manipulate me into leaving you. But you didn't tell me. No, I didn't. Because I was a coward, and because I convinced myself that protecting you from the pain was more important than being honest with you. I stood up again, needing to move, needing to process what I was learning. The kitchen suddenly felt too small to contain all the emotions I was experiencing. Rage, sadness, betrayal, but also something that might have been relief that the secrets were finally in the open. What about her husband? When did he find out? About 6 months ago. Carolyn had gotten careless, I think, because she wanted to get caught. She wanted to force a crisis that would make me choose between you and her. When Walsh confronted her, she told him everything, thinking it would push me to finally leave you. And instead you ended the relationship completely? I had to. Not just because of Walsh's threats, but because I realized that continuing it, even to manage Carolyn's emotions, was making everything worse. I told her that if she truly cared about me, she would let me try to save my marriage. How did she react to that? Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could see that this part of the story was particularly difficult for him to tell. She took the job in Chicago, but she also told Walsh that she would cooperate fully with any investigation he wanted to pursue. She gave him copies of emails, text messages, everything that documented not just our affair, but also my communications with certain clients that could be interpreted as questionable. So she was getting revenge on both of you. In a way, yes. She was hurt and angry, and she wanted us both to pay for the pain she was feeling. I walked to the refrigerator and got myself a bottle of water, not because I was thirsty, but because I needed something to do with my hands. The normalcy of the action felt surreal given the circumstances, like acting out a scene from someone else's life. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Anything, Sarah. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Are there other women? Other affairs that I don't know about? He looked directly at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I chose to interpret as complete honesty. No, there has never been anyone else before or since Carolyn. You have to believe me about that. And the questionable client activities that Walsh is investigating? How much danger are we really in? Marcus rubbed his face with both hands, and I could see that this question was keeping him awake at night. I honestly don't know. I've always been careful to operate within legal boundaries, but corporate law exists in a world where the lines aren't always clear. I've had clients who push boundaries, who operate in ways that might look suspicious to someone who wanted to build a case against them. Have you done anything illegal? I don't think so. I've never knowingly helped a client break the law, but I've helped them find creative solutions to complex problems, And some of those solutions might look questionable to prosecutors who are looking for wrongdoing. So Walsh might actually have a case? He might have enough to cause serious problems, even if he doesn't have enough to win in court. The legal system can destroy someone's reputation and career long before any actual guilt is established. I sat back down at the table, feeling the full weight of our situation settling over me like a heavy blanket. We weren't just dealing with the aftermath of an affair. We were potentially facing financial ruin, professional disgrace, and the destruction of everything we had worked to build. What do we do now, Marcus? How do we protect ourselves and our family? First, I called David Steinberg tomorrow morning. He's the best criminal defense attorney in the city, and if anyone can help us navigate this situation, it's him. That will be expensive. It will be very expensive. We might have to sell the house, liquidate our retirement accounts, maybe even ask Emma to take out loans for the rest of medical school. The thought of our daughter having to deal with financial stress because of her father's mistakes made my heart ache. Emma had worked so hard to get into medical school, had dedicated herself completely to her studies and her future career. Now she might have to worry about money and family scandal during what should be the happiest time of her life. We have to call her tomorrow, before she leaves for Italy. I know. God, Sarah, the thought of telling her makes me sick. She's going to be devastated, not just about the affair, but about the potential legal consequences. She's going to blame herself for not seeing the signs, for not being there to help us. That's why we have to make sure she understands that none of this is her fault, that she shouldn't let our problems affect her marriage or her happiness. I looked at Marcus sitting across from me, this man who had been my partner for 2 decades, who had held my hand through my mother's death and celebrated every milestone in Emma's life, who had made love to me just last week while secretly carrying the weight of secrets that could destroy us both. I don't know if I can forgive you, Marcus. I understand that. I don't know if I would be able to forgive something like this either. But I also don't know if I can walk away from 20 years of marriage without at least trying to save what's left. He looked up at me with something that might have been hope. What does that mean? It means that we're going to fight this together. We're going to hire the best attorney we can afford. We're going to protect our family as much as possible. And we're going to see if our marriage can survive the worst thing that's ever happened to it. And if it can't, if you decide that the betrayal is too big to overcome, then we'll deal with that when the time comes. But right now, we have bigger problems than our marriage. Right now, we need to focus on keeping you out of prison and our family out of the newspapers. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand, and for the first time all evening, I didn't pull away from his touch. I love you, Sarah. I know I don't deserve your support, but I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. I love you too, Marcus. That's the problem. If I didn't love you, this would be easy. I could just leave and start over somewhere else. But I do love you, and that means I have to at least try to save us. We sat in silence for a few more minutes, holding hands across the kitchen table, while the grandfather clock continued marking time. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold that reminded me of Emma's wedding flowers. In a few hours, our daughter would be boarding a plane for her honeymoon, believing that her parents had the perfect marriage she had always admired. In a few days, she would return to find that everything had changed, that the foundation of stability she had counted on her entire life had been built on lies and secrets. But she would also find that her parents were still together, still fighting for their marriage and their family, still believing that love might be enough to overcome even the biggest mistakes. As Marcus and I finally went upstairs to try to get a few hours of sleep before the most difficult day of our lives began, I realized that the woman behind the curtain hadn't destroyed our marriage after all. She had simply revealed the cracks that were already there, the secrets that had been growing in the darkness, the choices that one of us had made without considering how they would affect the other. Now we had to decide whether those cracks could be repaired, or whether they would ultimately bring down everything we had built together. Only time would tell if 20 years of love was enough to overcome 2 years of lies.